If you've never soldered before, or maybe you're a bit rusty, or maybe you've soldered copper pipes but never have soldered electronics, I highly recommend what I say on this page of the booklet. If you have never soldered before, read through the Learn to Solder book. It's a neat book. It's very handy. Lots of helpful hints. Use it, love it, learn it. Very important. Practice, practice, practice. Practice with the junk parts first. There's a little baggie in your kit that includes a selection of miscellaneous parts that really aren't going to do anything except the most important thing, which is teach you how to solder. You'll have a little board with a microchip on it, and then some of these bits and pieces. These are capacitors. Nothing you can hurt here. This is why it's the practice part. So I really highly recommend that you practice first, especially if you've not put together anything before. The tools you want to gather are your soldering iron, which is a little out of picture here, some solder, side cutters, helping hands. I was looking at the price of solder on Amazon, and it's absolutely crazy expensive, so I will be including some solder with your kit. Aren't I a nice guy? It's just, why spend $35 for a pound of solder you're not going to use that much of? So as you go through the book, we're going to solder up the chip first, because that's one of the steps for the kit too, except it has a smaller chip. So I have secured the board with the helping hands so that it sits nicely in place. Your general rule of thumb is you want to have your soldering iron heated up. It is going to take a couple of minutes for it to heat up depending on the iron. Some are faster than others. And I realize it's a little hard to see here, and it's actually a little hard for me to see too. But the pins are sticking through the holes here, and this is what we're going to solder. Now the technique that you want to use is you heat the joint, feed solder. Heat, joint, feed solder. And it doesn't take long, especially once you've had some practice. So I'm going to do this one first. So I have my solder in my left hand, and I have my soldering iron in my right. If you're a lefty, you'll switch it around. And you apply heat. Let me get in here. And then you apply solder. You apply heat, apply solder. Apply heat, apply solder. You can see on this particular one, this chip, I did the corners first, and that's kind of to keep it from falling out and to make it nice and stable. So in the real kit, you would, or for your practice, do all of them. Do every single one of them. They're all close together, and it's going to be stressful the first time. If it gets too stressful or you make mistakes, which you will make because that's learning, right? Have some soldering wick handy. Here, I have some soldering wick handy, and I'll show you how to use that in a second. But just practice. Do that. Heat, feed in little solder. Heat, feed in a little solder. It goes much quicker than you think it would. One of the biggest things I've found when teaching folks how to solder is they hold the iron on there too long, like they're ironing a shirt or something. Though you'd probably burn the shirt. So if you're good at ironing shirts, you're going to be good at soldering. I'll tell you that much. It's just, it takes a second or two to heat up that joint. It's all copper and metal, so it conducts heat real quickly. Now let's try one of these components. It doesn't matter where you put it, but this gets you used to kind of feeding in components. And one of the things that's often done when you fed in a component is you'll kind of bend the leads back slightly so the thing doesn't fall out. See, it has a tendency of wanting to fall out. So a lot of times I'll kind of bend the leads a little bit and put it back in my helping hands. Come on, helping hands, help me. And same technique. It's apply heat and apply the solder. Apply heat, apply the solder. So that one was pretty easy, right? You got these big leads. This is where your side cutters come in. So you just come in with your side cutters and snip, snip, and you toss those away or save them for a rainy day. I throw them out. So there is this, got that. Now let me mess up on purpose, and I usually don't need to do the on purpose part. I do it on my own. Let's say, oh, I've had too much coffee, which I have had too much coffee, and oh, I fed in a whole bunch of solder there. You see those two are joined together. Actually, I even though I had too much coffee, they didn't join. If I want to remove excess solder or remove that extra blob, or maybe there's a connection that's crossed, solder wick, here's how this works. Okay, just going to cut off that, and you take the solder wick and you put it over the joint that you want to clean up, and then apply a clean soldering iron to it, and what happens, like magic, it sucks up that excess solder onto the copper braid. It's real quick, and it's real easy, and it takes out a ton of solder. So if you have big blobs and you're like, oh, that stinks, use some solder wick. Once the solder wick section has absorbed solder, it's no good. It's used. You just use some scissors or side cutters, clip it off, and you're ready for your next one. So I really recommend going through this little board. It is not a perfect board. It is got some old components that are a little tarnished. It may be a little hard to solder, which is a good thing, I think, because it helps with the practice. Again, it's like learning how to bake a cake or learning how to swim or learning how to do anything else. We aren't born with it. We have to learn and teach ourselves it. So put together this little board before moving on. When you feel confident with this, you could practice desoldering and taking components off. Once you're confident, then move on to the actual kit, which is up next. Stay tuned.